Good afternoon, everyone. It's Wednesday and it's time for another music moment. Today, I would like to talk a little bit about oratorios. We talked about anthems last week, which are comparatively very short choral pieces that are used liturgically during the service. An oratorio would represent an entire concert of sacred music, and sometimes the choir draws from oratorios as their anthem repertoire because there's a lot of chorus in oratorios. So I'd like to start by giving you a definition, and this is from Choral Repertoire by Dennis Schrock. Very good book, standard book, and this is how he defines oratorio. A genre of composition begun in Italy during the Baroque era, generally a multi-sectional or multi-movement setting of a sacred, dramatic, or moral allegorical text, scored for soloists, chorus, and instruments. So that gives you a rough idea, but let's unpack that a little bit. It says it started in Italy during the Baroque era, and with the epics of Western music, the Baroque era begins around 1600 with the invention of instruments, and opera becomes a big thing during this era in Italy. Monteverdi is one of the first great opera composers. By the end of the 17th century, you have a lot of operas being written in Italy. And a young man named George Frederick Handel, who was actually born in Germany, studied in Italy and then became a famous composer in London, and he brought the oratorio tradition to London. So we think of the mature oratorios, we think of Handel. And here's my definition of an oratorio. I'm going to build on Schrock's. An oratorio is a sacred opera that's not staged. Okay, so all of the things you think about with operas, characters telling stories, intrigue, dialogue, a beginning, middle, and end of the plot, that is all in oratorio, except you're not seeing any sets, you're not seeing any costumes, you are having the singers stand up with a score and represent different characters. Almost all oratorios are based on Old Testament stories, although there are some New Testament subjects. We think of Handel's Messiah, for instance, but it's much more common to have an oratorio. Some of Handel's other names are Esther, Saul, all these great Old Testament subjects. Felix Mendelssohn, a century after Handel, also wrote oratorios. Elijah and St. Paul are two of his favorite oratorios. Also, the chorus is used to a much greater extent in oratorio than in opera. And because the choir is such an important part of sacred music, especially during the time it was created, it makes sense that there'd be a larger presence with the chorus. One final fun fact I'd like to leave with you about oratorios is they were first performed during Lent. And the reason why is opera with its violence and sex and all these secular topics weren't really appropriate to perform during Lent, at least to the people of London back when Handel lived. So during Lent, they would stage these sacred Old Testament stories in the opera house, not in church, in the opera house that people could go and see and still enjoy a dramatic story on a sacred topic rather than a secular one. So that's all for today. Next week we're going to talk about cantatas, which are shorter versions of oratorios. So see you then.